If you ever find yourself, standing by a high mountain stream in Leh Ladakh, right up there in the Trans-Himalayas, your first instinct is probably to just cup your hands and take a drink.
Oh, absolutely. The water rushing off those glaciers looks so pristine.
Right. It looks impossibly clear. You'd swear it was practically bottled at the source.
Yeah, but if you actually drank it, you might be unknowingly ingesting this, well, a silent, totally invisible cocktail of heavy metals.
Which is wild to think about. And it's a cocktail that standard, widely used agricultural tests just completely ignore.
They do. It really shatters this deep-seated assumption we all have about remoteness. We inherently equate high altitude and isolation with biological purity.
Like if it's far away from a city, it must be clean.
Exactly. But the data tells a much more complicated story about how interconnected and frankly vulnerable these seemingly untouched environments actually are.
Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are tearing into a fascinating research article titled Evaluation of Physicochemical and Heavy Metal Status in Irrigation, Stagnant, and Indus River Water at the Trans-Himalayan region.
It is quite the title, but the research is incredible.
It really is. The mission here is to explore the extreme environment of Leh Ladakh, unpack exactly what scientists are finding in its water, and discover why high-altitude ecosystems might be hiding a toxic secret. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get to the contamination itself, help me visualize the vulnerability of this specific landscape.
Sure.
I mean, what makes a high-altitude cold desert react differently to environmental stress compared to, say, a massive temperate river basin?
Well, think of a massive temperate river system like a robust financial institution, with enormous cash reserves.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. So if there's an unexpected economic shock, like it's a sudden influx of pollution, the system has this sheer volume and biological diversity to buffer the impact.
The pollution just gets diluted.
Exactly. It gets broken down and absorbed without crashing the whole ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But a cold desert like the Trans-Himalayan region is the exact opposite.
It's got no reserves.
None. It's an ecosystem operating with zero savings. You have extreme freezing temperatures, hyper-arid conditions, and incredibly limited fresh water.
Because it relies almost entirely on seasonal glacial melt.
Precisely. So there's absolutely no buffer.
Meaning any external pressure or like a sudden chemical input just hits the system immediately.
And the consequences ripple out without any natural dilution to soften the blow. The hydrology is so tightly coupled to that harsh climate that even microscopic shifts in water chemistry have these massive cascading biological effects.
Wow.
And because this region is the literal lifeline for the local human population, agriculture, and the wildlife, monitoring its water quality isn't just some academic exercise, it is a matter of immediate survival.
I mean, I'm just struggling to understand the sheer logistics of testing a system like that.
Yeah.
You are dealing with freezing, incredibly rugged terrain.
It's not easy, that's for sure.
How do researchers even establish a reliable laboratory-grade baseline for an entire hydrological network spread across a cold desert?
Well, the scale of the methodology is what makes this study so robust. The research team mapped out a massive 70-kilometer stretch across the Leh Ladakh region.
70 kilometers? That's a huge footprint.
It is. And to avoid just getting a narrow, localized reading, they targeted 3 distinct hydrological zones.
Okay, what were they?
They looked at the fast-flowing Indus River, the stagnant water bodies like local ponds, and then the heavily utilized agricultural irrigation channels.
That makes sense. Cover all the bases.
Right. They pulled 174 samples in total. That was 42 from the river and 66 each from the ponds and the irrigation networks.
But getting the water in a bottle is just one thing. Analyzing it is where the real separation of testing methods happens.
Oh, definitely.
Because when I read through the methodology, it felt like a medical checkup for the ecosystem. They were running 2 entirely different diagnostic paradigms on the same water.
That's a great way to put it.
First, they took the vital signs, those conventional physicochemical parameters. But then they brought in the deep blood work for the metal analysis.
Right. They brought out the big guns.
And I really want to talk about those big guns because the technology itself is wild. They used something called inductively coupled plasma optical emission spectrometry, or ICPOES.
Yes, ICPOES. What's fascinating here is how this machine actually hunts down those invisible contaminants.
Because you can't just drop a tablet in the water and watch it change color, right?
Exactly. When you are looking for trace heavy metals down to parts per million or even billion, you can't rely on basic chemical regions. You actually have to look at the elemental atomic structure itself.
Which sounds like science fiction.
It kind of is. The machine takes the water sample, nebulizes it into this incredibly fine mist, and then injects it directly into a plasma torch fueled by argon gas.
Wait, a plasma torch? How hot does that get?
We're talking about temperatures pushing 10,000 degrees Kelvin.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that is literally hotter than the surface of the sun.
So it's essentially vaporizing the water to instantly break every single molecule apart into individual atoms.
It forces those individual atoms into an excited state, and as they inevitably cool down and return to their normal ground state, each specific element emits a very distinct, measurable wavelength of light.
Like a glowing fingerprint.
Exactly. Lead emits a completely different light signature than cadmium, and cadmium is different from arsenic.
And the optical spectrometer reads those light signatures.
Right. It allows researchers to quantify the exact concentration of multiple heavy metals simultaneously. It's literally pulling invisible chemical ghosts out of what looks like perfectly clear water.
That is just mind-blowing. But that sets the stage perfectly because before they found the ghosts, they had to run those conventional vital signs, the physicochemical parameters.
The baseline data.
Right. The researchers tested pH, electrical conductivity, salinity, total dissolved solids, and chemical oxygen demand. And as someone reading this expecting an environmental disaster, the results of these basic tests completely threw me off.
I know, they seem fine, right?
The water essentially passed with flying colors.
It did. Across all three sources, the river, the stagnant ponds, and the irrigation channels, the parameters fell comfortably within the acceptable safety limits established by the World Health Organization and the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization.
Let me break some of this jargon down. The pH hovered slightly alkaline, around 7.4 to 7.5, which, is highly desirable for crop irrigation.
Very normal.
The electrical conductivity, which shows the dissolved ionic content, and the salinity were both moderate, so it's not going to salt burn the crops.
Right. Totally safe for agriculture in that regard.
And the chemical oxygen demand, the COD, which indicates organic pollution, was surprisingly low. And if I'm remembering the biological mechanism correctly, a low COD is a huge relief, right? Because high organic pollution essentially suffocates a water body.
You've got it. Basically, microbes consume dissolved oxygen when they break down organic waste, like sewage. So in a high-altitude environment where the water is already cold and biological processes are slow, a massive spike inside means the microbes are stripping all the available oxygen out of the water to process the pollution.
Which asphyxiates the fish and aquatic life.
Exactly. But here, the COD was low. The turbidity, or water clarity, was normal. The electrical conductivity indicated that dissolved salts weren't at dangerous levels.
So if I'm a local policymaker or a farmer relying on standard agricultural testing kits, I'm looking at this data and celebrating.
Oh, absolutely.
If the water passes all these conventional tests, it must be perfectly healthy, right? I'm thinking we have a pristine ecosystem.
And that celebration is the exact blind spot this study exposes. This is the profound danger of relying on 20th century water metrics in a rapidly shifting 21st century landscape.
It gives you a total false sense of security.
It does. Standard physicochemical tests were designed to detect immediate, highly visible threats. Salt burning your crops, acid killing your fish, or sewage choking the oxygen supply.
Things you can basically see or smell.
Right. They were never designed to detect the insidious, slow-motion threat of heavy metal contamination. So the water passes the conventional tests, creating this very powerful illusion of safety.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because then they fired up that plasma torch, the ICP-OES, to look for 5 specific heavy metals: arsenic, cadmium, lead, chromium, and nickel.
And that illusion of the pristine mountain stream just completely shatters.
It really does. What exactly did the high-tech analysis reveal?
Well, the findings present a very stark contamination pattern. Chromium and nickel levels were thankfully low, staying well within acceptable limits.
Okay, some good news.
Yes, but the concentrations of arsenic, cadmium, and lead significantly exceeded the WHO permissible limits for drinking water across multiple sampling locations.
I mean, I'm genuinely struggling to picture where this is coming from. If we were talking about a river downstream from a massive industrial manufacturing hub, it would make sense.
Sure, you'd expect it.
But Ladakh is a remote, high-altitude desert. Where on earth are these highly toxic metals originating, and why are they spiking now?
So the origin is actually this complex collision of deep geological history and sudden modern anthropogenic pressure.
Human impact.
Exactly. The Trans-Himalayan terrain has a highly specific hydrogeochemical makeup. The bedrock itself actually contains natural arsenic and cadmium-bearing minerals.
Wait, so the mountains themselves hold the toxicity?
They do. Over millions of years, water flows over these rocks, and through natural weathering, trace amounts of these metals leach into the hydrology.
So there is a naturally occurring baseline.
Yes, but natural geological leaching takes centuries. It does not explain the highly concentrated, localized spikes the researchers found.
Especially because the lead levels were notably higher in the irrigation water and the stagnant ponds compared to the fast-moving river.
Right, that sudden concentration is where human activity pulls the trigger. The region has experienced a massive, unprecedented tourism boom over the last decade.
Oh, wow.
You have rapid urbanization, a huge surge in vehicular traffic, and the hasty construction of small-scale infrastructure with really poor drainage.
Let's trace that mechanism, though. How does building a hotel or driving more diesel trucks translate into arsenic and lead in the irrigation water? I mean, are they just dumping batteries into the river?
Well, direct dumping of automotive and domestic waste certainly contributes, particularly with the lead. But the more systemic issue is how human activity alters the ambient chemistry of the environment itself.
How so?
When you introduce untreated domestic wastewater, vehicle exhaust, and runoff from poorly planned urban drainage into the ecosystem, you alter the pH and the chemical composition of the surface water and the soil.
Oh, I see. By changing the chemical makeup of the runoff, you actually accelerate the weathering process of the natural rocks.
You weaponize the geology. The human-induced chemical changes can cause the natural heavy metals locked in the sediment and bedrock to dissolve and mobilize into the water supply much faster than they would under purely natural conditions.
That is terrifying.
It's a dual threat. Humans are directly introducing new heavy metals through modern waste, while simultaneously altering the environmental chemistry to unlock the metals naturally dormant in the mountains.
And that perfectly explains why the irrigation water and the stagnant ponds showed some of the highest concentrations.
Right, they are much closer to the localized urban runoff.
And unlike the fast-moving Indus River, they don't have the kinetic energy to just flush the contaminants away. The heavy metals just settle there and concentrate.
And here's the worst part. Unlike organic waste, which eventually decomposes, heavy metals are entirely persistent. They do not biodegrade, they do not evaporate.
They just stay there.
Once they're in the stagnant pond or the irrigation channel, they are permanent residents of that ecosystem until they're physically absorbed by something else.
Which brings us to the terrifying ripple effect. The water looks perfectly clean. The conventional tests say it's completely safe for agriculture.
So the local farmers use it.
Yeah, they pump thousands of gallons of this arsenic, cadmium, and lead-laced water over their fields year after year. What actually happens at the biological level when these metals hit the soil?
This raises an important question, right?
Yeah.
Because we enter the cycle of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. When this contaminated water saturates the agricultural land, the heavy metals bind tightly to the soil particles.
Okay.
And as the forage plants and crops grow, their root systems absorb water and essential nutrients from that soil, but they cannot effectively filter out the heavy metals.
So the plants just suck it all up.
They uptake the cadmium, the arsenic, and the lead, integrating these toxic elements directly into their cellular structure.
So the plant itself becomes toxic, and then the local livestock, the yaks, the sheep, the cows, they're out there grazing on these contaminated forage plants day in and day out.
Exactly.
But why is it so dangerous for the animals and eventually the humans who eat them? I mean, if we ingest a toxin, our bodies usually have mechanisms to filter and excrete it. Why do heavy metals bypass our biological defenses?
Because heavy metals are incredibly deceitful at a molecular level. They often mimic the chemical structure of essential minerals that biological systems actually need.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Cadmium, for example, shares chemical similarities with calcium and zinc. So when an animal or a human ingests cadmium, the body is tricked into absorbing it rapidly, thinking it's a necessary nutrient.
Oh, wow, it's like a Trojan horse.
That's exactly what it is. But once inside, the biological filtration systems completely fail.
The kidneys just can't process it.
The renal system is particularly vulnerable. Cadmium binds strongly to proteins in the kidneys and just accumulates there over decades, eventually causing severe renal failure and hepatic or liver damage.
The body essentially hoards the poison because it lacks the specific evolutionary pathways to excrete it in large quantities.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for the other metals? The study found high spikes of lead and arsenic as well. We know lead is notoriously bad for neurological development, but what is the actual cellular mechanism making it so destructive?
Lead induces profound oxidative stress. It basically disrupts the delicate balance within cells, generating free radicals that damage DNA, proteins, and cell membranes.
And in the brain.
In the brain, lead interferes with the neurotransmitters that allow neurons to communicate, leading to severe cognitive and neurological toxicity.
And what about arsenic?
Arsenic, on the other hand, is a potent carcinogen. At a cellular level, long-term exposure to arsenic disrupts the production of ATP, which is the fundamental energy currency of the cell.
So it stops the cells from functioning.
It effectively starves the cells of energy while simultaneously inducing genetic mutations that lead to skin, liver, kidneys, and nervous system cancers.
When you lay out the pathology like that, the concept of biomagnification becomes incredibly grim because the plants pull the heavy metals from the soil. The yaks eat massive quantities of the plants, compressing all those metals into their tissue.
Right.
And then humans consume the meat, the milk, and the crops. The toxicity multiplies at every single trophic level of the food chain.
It's a compounding effect.
By the time the food reaches the dinner table, the concentration of heavy metals is vastly higher than what was originally measured in that seemingly clear irrigation water.
It creates a complete breakdown of mineral homeostasis in the population. And because the symptoms of heavy metal poisoning like gradual cognitive decline, kidney stress, or the slow development of cancers take years or even decades to manifest, it's almost impossible to diagnose the root cause.
Because you wouldn't think to look at the water that passed the visual and basic chemical tests decades ago.
Exactly. The source of the illness is incredibly difficult to trace back without comprehensive, high-tech baseline studies like this one.
This completely upends how we need to approach environmental monitoring. Testing the water is really only the first domino.
Absolutely.
If the metals are in the water, they are in the soil. If they are in the soil, they are in the livestock. You cannot protect public health without monitoring the entire nutrient cycle.
And that's why this paper is so critical.
But the researchers didn't publish this just to sound the alarm and walk away, right? The primary function of establishing such rigorous baseline data is to equip local policymakers with the exact evidence needed to deploy targeted mitigation strategies.
And that is the crucial takeaway. Now that the specific metals and their geographical hotspots have been quantified, mitigation can be localized and highly specific.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, at the domestic level, it proves that standard boiling or basic charcoal filtering is entirely insufficient for the drinking water.
Because you can't boil away a heavy metal.
Right. Communities require advanced filtration systems specifically designed for heavy metal removal, like reverse osmosis or specialized ion exchange filters.
But you can't reverse osmosis an entire agricultural irrigation network. That's impossible. How do you mitigate the metals once they are already being pumped into the soil?
The study actually highlights several fascinating agronomical interventions. One highly effective strategy is the heavy application of organic manure.
Wait, really? How does adding organic waste solve a heavy metal problem?
It all comes down to binding capacity. Organic matter is incredibly rich in humic substances, which have a high affinity for binding to heavy metal cations.
Okay, so they stick together.
Right. When you enrich the soil with organic manure, it essentially acts as a chemical sponge, immobilizing the arsenic, lead, and cadmium in the soil matrix.
So the metals are still physically there in the dirt?
Yes, but they are locked up chemically, which drastically reduces the amount the crop roots can actually absorb.
That is brilliant. It's using biological chemistry to outmaneuver geological
It's
chemistry.
very elegant.
I also read about them suggesting the introduction of specific microbial consortiums into the soil and even planting certain crops with heavy metal chelating properties. We're talking about engineered or naturally selected bacteria that actually possess the ability to neutralize these metals.
Yes, microbes that excrete specific compounds to trap or neutralize the toxic metals before they ever breach the plant's root system. It is a perfect example of utilizing cutting-edge bioremediation to protect a traditional agricultural system.
It is science, uncovering a hidden, complex problem and then providing the exact tools needed to fight it. Let's pull all these threads together.
Let's do it.
We ventured into the freezing, fragile extremes of the Trans-Himalayan cold desert. We broke down how a rapidly modernizing world can weaponize ancient geology, forcing natural heavy metals out of the bedrock and into the local water supply.
Yeah.
And we confronted the dangerous reality that water passing our standard 20th century physical tests can still harbor an invisible, highly toxic chemical cocktail of arsenic, cadmium, and lead.
And we tracked how those invisible contaminants exploit our biology, bypassing our natural defenses to accumulate in our organs and magnify up the food chain.
Which really highlights why advanced analytical tools like plasma spectrometry are no longer optional for environmental monitoring. They are absolutely mandatory.
I couldn't agree more.
We've all heard the old cliche, you are what you eat. I mean, it's practically the golden rule of health.
Oh, sure.
But when you look at the relentless compounding mechanics of bioaccumulation, from the mountain runoff, binding to the soil, tricking the roots of the crops, and concentrating in the tissue of the livestock, perhaps the more urgent modern reality we have to face is you are what your food drinks.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
As shifting climates alter global hydrology and human expansion pushes into the furthest, most pristine-looking corners of the map, it makes you wonder, what invisible, ancient ingredients might be secretly watering the crops in your own region? Something to carefully consider the next time you pour a perfectly clear glass of water from your tap.